What happens when a royal guest faces off against two of daytime television's most controversial hosts? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits down with Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar on The View, leading to one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a complete meltdown that had viewers reaching for their remotes and social media exploding with reactions. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when royal protocol meets daytime drama. The atmosphere in the View studio was already charged with an unusual tension. As Meghan Markle walked onto the set, what should have been a routine promotional appearance for her latest charitable initiative quickly transformed into a battleground of accusations, interruptions, and barely contained hostility. The cameras were rolling, the audience was packed, and nobody, not even the production team, could have predicted the verbal warfare that was about to erupt. From the moment Meghan Markle settled into her chair, something felt different. Whoopi Goldberg's usually warm welcome seemed forced, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she shuffled through her note cards with unusual aggression. Joy Behar sat beside her, that familiar smirk playing across her lips, the same expression she wore whenever she sensed blood in the water. The other co-hosts seemed to fade into the background, sensing that this was going to be Whoopi and Joy's show. So Meghan Markle, Whoopi began, her voice carrying an edge that immediately put the studio audience on alert. You're here to talk about your new mental health initiative, but I think we need to address the elephant in the room first. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she continued. A lot of Americans are wondering why we should be listening to advice about mental health from someone who has spent the last few years publicly trashing the monarchy and her husband's family. The question hit like a sledgehammer. Meghan Markle's composure faltered for just a moment, her jaw tightening as she processed what had just been thrown at her. The studio fell silent except for the low hum of cameras capturing every micro-expression. This wasn't the softball interview her team had been promised. "I'm sorry, Whoopi," Meghan replied, her American accent seeming more pronounced under stress. "But I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about what I've been trying to accomplish. Speaking truth about family dysfunction isn't trashing anyone. It's trying to break cycles of harm." Joy Behar jumped in before Meghan could finish her thought, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, please. You've made millions of dollars selling out your husband's grandmother, his father, and his brother. And now you want to lecture Americans about mental health. The audacity is really something else." The Duchess's hands gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles whitening as she fought to maintain her composure. "Joy, with all due respect, you're completely mischaracterizing everything I've said. I've never sold out anyone. I've shared my truth about growing up in an institution that prioritizes image over the well-being of its own members." "Your truth?" Whoopi interjected, her voice rising with incredulity. "Your truth? What about your husband's truth? What about William's truth? What about the truth of the taxpayers who funded your privileged life for decades before you decided to cash in on your trauma?" The verbal assault was relentless, and Meghan could feel the walls closing in. What was supposed to be a conversation about mental health advocacy had devolved into a coordinated attack on her character and motivations. The audience sat in stunned silence, many of them shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they witnessed what felt more like an interrogation than an interview. "I came here in good faith," Meghan said, her voice tighter now, "to talk about helping people who are struggling with their mental health. Instead, you're ambushing me with talking points that sound like they came straight from British tabloids." Joy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ambushing you? This is called journalism, Meghan. Maybe you're not used to it because you've been doing puff pieces and paid interviews where everyone kisses your ring. But this is America, and we ask the hard questions here." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable, and Meghan's face flushed with anger. "Journalism? This isn't journalism. This is a hit job. You've clearly made up your minds about me before I even walked through that door." Whoopi seized on her defensive response like a predator sensing weakness. "We've made up our minds. We're responding to your own words, your own actions." You did interviews where you accused your family of racism, and now you're sitting here playing the victim when people call you out on it. The tension in the studio was now palpable. Camera operators zoomed in closer, sensing that something explosive was building. The other co-hosts looked like deer in headlights, unsure whether to intervene or let the carnage continue. The audience members were whispering among themselves, many looking deeply uncomfortable with the hostile turn the interview had taken. Meghan's media training was being pushed to its absolute limits. Every instinct told her to walk away, but she was trapped in her chair live on national television with two veteran talk show hosts who clearly had no intention of letting up their assault. "You know what's really rich?" Joy continued, her voice getting shriller. "You talk about breaking cycles of harm, but what about the harm you've caused? What about the harm to the Queen in her final years? What about the harm to your brother-in-law who lost his brother and his best friend? What about the harm to your father-in-law who's been painted as this monster when all he's ever done is love your husband?" Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Meghan's breathing became more labored, her face growing redder with each passing second. The Duchess, who had faced down an unforgiving British press, was being systematically dismantled by two talk show hosts on daytime television. "That's enough," Meghan said, her voice low and dangerous. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know my family. You don't know the dynamics. And you certainly don't know what it's like to grow up in that environment." But Whoopi and Joy smelled blood, and they weren't about to back down now. The confrontation was reaching a critical mass, and everyone in that studio could sense that something was about to snap. The breaking point was approaching fast, and what happened next would shock everyone watching. Whoopi leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk, clearly relishing the discomfort she had created. "Look, Meghan, we're not trying to attack you personally, but when you put yourself out there as a public figure making these claims, you have to expect pushback. You can't just throw stones and then cry foul when people throw them back." That was the match that lit the fuse. Meghan Markle's composure finally cracked, and her voice rose to a level that made the entire studio sit up straighter. Throw stones, are you kidding me right now? I shared my experience of growing up in a family where my husband's mother died because of media harassment, where I watched my husband get torn apart by the same press that killed his mother. And you're sitting here acting like I'm the problem. The raw emotion in her voice was undeniable. But instead of showing empathy, Joy doubled down with even more venom. "Oh, here we go with the Diana card again. Her mother has been dead for over 25 years, Meghan. At some point, you need to stop using her death as an excuse for every bad decision you make." The audience audibly gasped. Several people in the front row looked genuinely shocked that Joy had gone there. Even some of the crew members exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Joy wasn't finished. "And don't even get me started on Meghan. She knew exactly what she was signing up for when she married into that family. She's not some innocent victim. She's a former actress who saw an opportunity and took it." Meghan Markle's hands were shaking now. Whether from rage or emotional overwhelm, it was impossible to tell. How dare you sit there and talk about me like that? You don't know me. You don't know what I went through. And you have absolutely no right to minimize the racism and harassment I faced." Whoopi jumped back into the fray, her voice taking on a mocking tone that was particularly cruel. "Racism? Really? We're going to play that card too? Meghan is biracial, sure, but she lived as a white woman in Hollywood for years. She only started talking about being black when it became convenient for her narrative." The studio fell deadly silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure if they should keep rolling or cut to commercial. This had gone far beyond a contentious interview. This was character assassination being broadcast live to millions of viewers. Meghan's face was now completely flushed, her breathing rapid and shallow. "You have no idea what you're talking about. None. You're perpetuating exactly the kind of ignorant, righteous rhetoric that drove us out of the country in the first place. This is exactly why we left. Because of people like you who think they know our story better than we do." Joy's response was swift and merciless. "People like us. What's that supposed to mean, Meghan? Are you calling us racist now? Because we're asking you tough questions? Because we're not buying into your victim narrative?" The Duchess was spiraling now, caught in a web of accusations and provocations that seemed designed to make her lose control completely. I'm calling you ignorant. I'm calling you cruelly down, and I'm calling you exactly the kind of people who make it impossible to have honest conversations about difficult topics. Whoopi stood up from her chair, something she rarely did during interviews, and pointed directly at Meghan. Honest conversations? You want to talk about honest? Let's be honest about the fact that you've made a career out of complaining about how hard your life has been while living in mansions and flying on private jets. Let's be honest about the fact that you've hurt every single person who ever loved you just so you could make a buck. The venom in her voice was shocking even by the View's standards. Meghan was visibly shaking now, her face cycling through emotions. Rage, hurt, disbelief, and something that looked dangerously close to despair. You're sick. Both of you are sick. This isn't an interview. This is psychological torture. You're sitting here attacking my dead mother-in-law, attacking me, and calling it journalism. Joy laughed again, that same cruel laugh that had punctuated the entire confrontation. Psychological torture. Oh my God, Meghan, you really do think you're special, don't you? This is a talk show, not a therapy session. If you can't handle basic questions about your public statements, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. The breaking point had been reached and surpassed. Meghan was no longer the polished royal who had walked onto the set 30 minutes earlier. She was a woman pushed beyond her limits, and everyone in that studio could see it. Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than all her shouting had. Basic questions? You think what you've been doing here is asking basic questions? You've spent the last half hour systematically attacking everything I care about. My husband, my children's future. Nothing is off limits to you, is it? Whoopi sensed she had her right where she wanted her and decided to go for the kill shot. Your children's future. Let's talk about that. What kind of future are you giving them by teaching them that running away is the answer to every problem? What kind of legacy are you creating by showing them that family loyalty means nothing compared to money and fame? That was it, the final straw. Meghan shot up from her chair so violently that it rolled backward and nearly toppled over. Don't you dare bring my children into this. Don't you dare. Her voice echoed through the studio with such force that several audience members actually jumped in their seats. Security guards at the edges of the set took a step forward, unsure if they needed to intervene. The other co-hosts sat frozen, finally realizing that this had gone too far, but unable or unwilling to stop it. Joy wasn't backing down, even in the face of Meghan's explosive anger. Why not? You've brought them into everything else. You've put them in the public eye. You've made them part of your narrative. They're fair game now, Meghan. That's what you chose when you decided to make your family drama into a business. The Duchess was breathing so hard she looked like she might hyperventilate. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the air conditioning in the studio. You're monsters. Both of you are absolute monsters. This is exactly why people hate this show. This is exactly why your ratings are in the toilet. This because you're not journalists, you're bullies with a platform. Whoopi's face darkened at the ratings comment. Clearly she had hit a nerve. Our ratings? Our ratings? You want to talk about ratings? At least we don't have to pay people to listen to us. At least we don't have to buy our way onto podcasts and pay for positive coverage. The accusation was so baseless and inflammatory that even some of the crew members looked shocked. Meghan's response was immediate and filled with barely contained rage. That's a lie and you know it. You're literally making things up now because you've run out of legitimate attacks. This is libel. This is defamation. Joy shrugged with theatrical indifference. Prove it. Sue us. Oh, wait. You can't because you'd have to prove damages, Rose. And how do you damage a reputation that's already in the gutter? The cruelty was breathtaking. Meghan stood there visibly trembling, looking around the studio as if she couldn't believe what was happening to her. The audience watched in horrified fascination as a member of the British royal family completely unraveled on live television. This ends now, Meghan said, her voice barely controlled. This sick, twisted performance you're putting on ends right now. But Whoopi and Joy weren't finished. They had her on the ropes and they were going to make sure she went down hard. What came next would push Meghan past the point of no return. Whoopi's eyes gleamed with a predatory satisfaction as she delivered what she clearly thought would be the knockout blow. You know what, Meghan? Let's talk about what really bothers people about you. It's not that you left the royal family. Good for you if that's what you needed to do. It's the way you did it. The lies, the manipulation, the constant playing of the victim while you live in luxury that most people can only dream of. But what really gets me is how you've turned your children into props in your little revenge fantasy against your family. Those kids are going to grow up knowing that their mother chose money and fame over their relationships with their grandparents, their uncle, their cousins. How's that for breaking cycles of harm? The attack on her role as a mother was the final trigger. Meghan's face went from red to completely white, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. When she spoke, her voice was so low and dangerous that the entire studio leaned forward to hear her. You just crossed a line that you can never uncross. You want to attack my husband? Fine. You want to attack me? Disgusting. But I can handle it. But my children are off limits. And the fact that you would use them as weapons shows exactly what kind of people you really are. Joy, seemingly oblivious to the powder keg she was sitting next to, decided to pour more gasoline on the fire. Oh, spare us. The righteous mother act, Meghan. Your kids are already being used as weapons by you. Every time you do an interview, every time you write a book, every time you make a statement, you're using them as justification for your choices. Don't pretend you're protecting them when you're exploiting them. That was it. The dam burst completely. Meghan exploded with a fury that no one in that studio had ever witnessed before. Exploiting them? I'm exploiting them? You sit here every single day tearing apart people's families, destroying reputations, spreading lies and hatred, and you have the audacity to lecture me about exploitation. You're parasites. Both of you are absolute parasites who make a living off other people's pain. Her voice was so loud that several audience members covered their ears. The security guards moved closer, clearly concerned that the situation was spiraling completely out of control. But Meghan wasn't done. Years of pent-up frustration and anger were pouring out of her like a broken dam. You want to know what exploitation looks like? It's sitting behind that desk pretending to be journalists while you systematically destroy anyone who doesn't fit your narrow worldview. It's using your platform to spread hatred and division while pretending to care about social justice. You're hypocrites of the highest order, and everyone watching this knows it. Whoopi stood up again, her own anger now matching Meghan's intensity. Hypocrites! We're hypocrites! You're the one who preached about privacy while selling your family's secrets to the highest bidder. You're the one who talked about service while abandoning your duties. You're the one who claims to care about mental health while destroying your own family's emotional well-being. The shouting match was now in full swing, with both sides screaming over each other. Joy jumped back in, her voice shrill and cutting. And let's not forget about the racism claims. You and Harry threw around accusations of racism with zero proof, zero specifics, and zero accountability. You nearly destroyed the monarchy with your lies, and now you want to play victim when people call you out on it. Meghan's response was immediate and volcanic. Lies? Lies? You think racism is a lie? You think the death threats against me were lies? You think the coordinated campaign to destroy my reputation was a lie? You're sitting here right now proving exactly what we were talking about. This is exactly the behavior we were trying to escape. The confrontation had devolved into complete chaos. All pretense of this being a television interview had disappeared. This was now a full-blown verbal war with no rules and no mercy. The other co-hosts sat in stunned silence. The audience was in shock, and the crew looked like they wanted to disappear. Whoopi, her face contorted with rage, decided to go nuclear. You know what the real tragedy is, Meghan? Your mother-in-law would be ashamed of you. Diana would be absolutely disgusted by what you've become. She dedicated her life to service, to helping others, to building bridges, and you've done nothing but burn bridges and cash checks. You've dishonored her memory in ways that are truly sickening. The entire studio fell dead silent. The line that should never be crossed had been obliterated. Using Diana's memory as a weapon was so far beyond acceptable that even Joy looked uncomfortable. Meghan stood there for a moment, completely still, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. When she finally spoke, her voice was eerily calm, which somehow made it more terrifying than all her shouting had been. "That's it. We're done here. You can sit in your little bubble of hatred and ignorance, but I'm not going to be part of this circus anymore." She reached up and pulled off her microphone with such force that the clip broke, the small device clattering to the floor. "You want to know what my mother-in-law would think? She'd think you're exactly the kind of people she spent her life fighting against. Bullies who use their power to hurt others. People who profit from pain and call it entertainment." Joy made one last desperate attempt to keep her engaged, her voice now slightly panicked as she realized the interview was slipping away from them. "Oh, so you're running away again? Just like you ran away from your responsibilities? Just like you ran away from your family? Running away is what you do best, isn't it, Meghan?" Meghan turned back to face her, and the look in her eyes was pure ice. "I'm not running away. I'm walking away from toxicity. There's a difference, though I wouldn't expect you to understand it. You've built your entire career on toxicity." She looked directly into the main camera, speaking to the audience at home rather than the hosts who had tortured her for the past hour. "To everyone watching this, I want you to see what I just experienced. This is what passes for journalism on this show. This is what they call asking tough questions. They attacked my dead mother-in-law. They attacked my husband. They attacked my children, and they called it entertainment." Her voice remained steady, but the emotion underneath was unmistakable. "If you're struggling with your mental health, if you're dealing with family trauma, if you're trying to break cycles of harm in your own life, please don't let people like this convince you that your pain doesn't matter. Don't let them tell you that speaking your truth makes you weak or wrong." Whoopi tried to interrupt, but Meghan cut her off with a gesture that commanded absolute silence. "I came here to talk about helping people, and instead I was subjected to an hour of psychological abuse. That says everything you need to know about this show and these hosts." She turned and walked toward the exit, her security detail quickly flanking her. But just before she reached the door, she stopped and turned back one final time. The entire studio held its breath, waiting to see what she would say. "You know what the most pathetic part of all this is?" Meghan said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent studio. "You actually think you won something here today. You think tearing me down makes you look strong or smart or relevant, but all you've done is show America exactly who you really are. And that's going to follow you a lot longer than this interview will follow me." With that, Meghan Markle walked out of the View studio, leaving behind a scene of complete devastation. Whoopi and Joy sat in their chairs, suddenly looking smaller and less sure of themselves. The audience sat in stunned silence, many of them clearly disturbed by what they had just witnessed. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing the aftermath of what would go down as one of the most controversial moments in talk show history. Joy fumbled for words, trying to salvage something from the wreckage, but her usual sharp tongue seemed to have deserted her. Whoopi simply stared at the door through which Meghan had exited, as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The production assistant scrambled to figure out how to fill the remaining time in the show, but the damage was done. What was supposed to be a routine celebrity interview had turned into a complete disaster that would be talked about for years to come. The View had gotten their confrontation, but at what cost? As the credits rolled and the studio lights dimmed, one thing was crystal clear. This was a train wreck that everyone involved would want to forget, but no one who witnessed it ever would.